Always good to be here with everyone. And don't worry if you're just joining us today and you weren't here yesterday, I'll catch you up a little bit. My name is Sam Feinsmith. I'm one of the members of the senior core faculty at IJS. I'm wearing glasses today. I have long brown hair. I have light skin, and I'm wearing a checkered shirt. I also just want to affirm that you are welcome here in the fullness of your humanity, just as you are. And one way that we can extend welcome to everyone is by sharing our pronouns. Mine are he, him, his. And if you'd like to share yours in the chat, you can rename yourself and add your pronouns. I also just want to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the land of the Council of the Three Fires, the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Ondawa nations. I just want to take a minute to situate us in our arc of practice here, because every day kind of builds on the day that came before. I just want to kind of remind us that what we're doing right now as Jews living within the Jewish calendrical cycle is that we're actually approaching just in a couple of short weeks the month of Tammuz, which begins to move us kind of squarely into a 3-week period of mourning, beginning on the 17th of Tammuz and culminating on the 9th of Av. And during that time, we really commemorate the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and recognize that even our most cherished and beloved structures, even a place where God's presence was fully manifest, right? Even that can crumble to the ground and will eventually crumble to the ground, because the nature of all things is impermanence. And with that awareness in mind, we begin to ask the question, what do we do when things fall apart? As they will, right? Our health will eventually give rise to sickness. The people that we care about and love will also grow ill, will eventually have to part from us, whether through life circumstance or death, right? Our identities are constantly changing and in flux. The things we come to rely upon in life shift and change, and suddenly they're not there in the same way. Friends that had been very close pass on or become estranged. Right? There's literally nothing permanent that we can really kind of lean on unequivocally and absolutely in this world without at some point becoming, disappointed. That's just how it is. I didn't make it that way, right? It's not anyone's fault. It's not your fault. That's just the way it is to be, a human being bound to a body and a finite mind in space and time. And our prep for the high holidays really, therefore, begins on Tisha B'Av with a kind of letting go, where we kind of let the illusion that things are solid fall away. And with that letting go, we also let go of the walls of the identities, the false identities that we create to try and create the illusion of stability and control in our lives. And as Rabbi Lou reminded us yesterday, as we let go of the walls of identity and those walls crumble, right, we can then turn toward that which remains, And rather than telling you what remains, right, we're going to investigate in our practice, what is it that remains when all of the walls crumble? And hopefully through that process, we will discover and recognize an inner refuge that can never crumble. So we're doing that through the practice of self-inquiry, which is simply a practice of inquiring into who we really are. The foundational question of self-inquiry is, who am I? Who am I really? Beyond the false identities, the masks, right? The coping skills, the egoic strategies, and what's left when everything constructed, right? When all of those constructed dimensions of my being come down. And as Rabbi Lu reminded us, right, this work requires that we engage in a simple turn of mind, a turn toward consciousness and a turn away from denial, a turn toward consciousness and a turn away from denial. And yesterday we encountered beautiful teaching by the Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron that, you know, the very first noble truth of Buddhism points out that suffering is inevitable for human beings as long as we believe that things last, that they don't disintegrate, that they can be counted on to satisfy our hunger for security. From this point of view, the only time we ever know what's really going on is when the rug's been pulled out and we can't find anywhere to land. So traditionally speaking, you know, when things fall apart, we become fearful, confused, reactive. And Chodron is inviting us into the possibility that actually when things fall apart, there's a very precious opportunity, right? Because we can finally see through the delusion of solidity, the false assumption or belief that everything is solid. And then we have a choice, right? We can use these situations either to wake ourselves up or to put ourselves to sleep. So the invitation of Tisha B'Av is really the invitation to use the moments in our lives when the rug's been pulled out from underneath us and there's no longer any solid ground underfoot to wake up to who we truly are. So we're going to turn toward today's teaching. Yesterday, we began to kind of deconstruct the walls of our false identities by noticing that actually this body that we take ourselves to be is actually impermanent. It's always changing, right? And not just in the kind of long-term way where we look in the mirror and we see that we're getting older or that we've grown thinner or a little bit more plump or taller or shorter, right? Or that we now have gray hair when we used to have, you know, blonde hair or brown hair or red hair, right? And more wrinkles than we had, you know, 10 years ago or whatever the case may be. Not just in that kind of a long-term way, but also moment to moment, right? There's actually no thing that you can call the body and claim as I, me, and mine. Because when we look at the body moment by moment, when I look at the body moment by moment, what I see is that the body is like a river of sensation, right? It's an energy field that's constantly changing, constantly in flux. Don't take my word for it, check it out for yourself. And we'll do that in our practice today again, because each day we'll come back to the foundational skills of the previous day and we'll build upon them. Today, we're going to look at a couple of sources that help us to begin to do the same kind of work, but relative to the mind, relative to the finite mind, because we don't only take ourselves to be the finite body and therefore imagine and dream up the illusion that we are somehow separate from all other bodies, right? But we also take ourselves to be the finite mind. And so we're going to take a look at a couple of sources that can help us to begin to break through that false identity. And if I can ask our friend here, Kat Esposito, who's really behind the scenes here, making all of the wonderfulness happen, to just pull up that screen share, that would be helpful. And also, for those who want to follow along on their own sheet, there's a link to these sources in the chat. So we're going to be looking at two Hasidic texts here and reading them through the laboratory or the lens of our own experience. First is from a book called Yosher Divrei Emet, which is a Hasidic classic published by one of the students of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was the leader of the Hasidic movement in the second generation after the passing of the Baal Shem Tov. The author is Rabbi Meshulam Fleibush Heller. And this is actually an epistle that he wrote to one of his friends to try and convey the teachings of Hasidism in a very practical and down-to-earth way. And the whole book in some ways is a reflection on humility and pride, and how we overcome our pride and live from a place of profound humility. And I'm going to read in English, and those of you who want to follow along in the Hebrew are welcome. So Kat, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down to the full English text, that would be super helpful. Here's what he has to say. In reality, we humans are naturally inclined by birth, such that our hearts are haughty. As our sages of blessed memory teach in the Midrash and in the Talmud, there are 4 prideful creatures: the lion, the ox, the eagle, and the human, right? Each of these animals or mammals or birds is the kind of, the alpha of their species, of their family, right? So the lion is the king of the jungle, the ox is the king of domesticated animals, the eagle is the king of the birds, right? And then there's humanity. And says the Talmud, the human is more prideful than all of them. We humans are the most prideful species on the planet, says the Talmud. The Blessed One, says Rabbi Meshulam Feibish, granted me a truthful parable related to this. Let's say we're traveling on the road in a wagon and we fall asleep. The wagon driver is accompanying us and drives up a high mountain. But when the driver reaches the top of the mountain, the path is flat because he already passed the upward slope. If we were to wake up thereafter and someone were to tell us that we're on a mountain, we wouldn't believe them because we can't see any evidence to that effect. If we had initially witnessed the slope we descended, we would know the truth. But we were asleep, right? And now that the road is flat, on what grounds can we possibly conclude that we're on a mountaintop? How can this reality be made known to us? Subsequently, when we descend the opposite slope, which dips into a valley, we will discern that we had been on a mountain. And now he unpacks the metaphor for us. In reality, our pride is like a high mountain. If we could feel and truly know that our heart is growing prideful within us, we would certainly discern that we are experiencing pridefulness and hubris, and that we've ascended a mountain. But we were born on this mountain, which is our pride, which is why it seems to us that we have no pride and that we're not on a mountain at all. How can we possibly discern this to be the case if we don't fully descend to the foot of the mountain by habituating ourselves to surrender and humility in heart and deed, and especially in heart, so that the truth will become known to us? So, Kat, you can pull down the screen share. It's a beautiful, beautiful parable, And what he's basically saying is that we're prideful creatures, we're egotistical, self-centered creatures, but we don't even realize that that's the case. We don't even realize that that's the case. There's a kind of ingrained or inborn ignorance in us that doesn't allow us to see that this is actually the case. And, the beliefs that we hold are that kind of perpetuate this pride, and they're unconscious beliefs. We don't even realize we're holding them until we start to actually try to cultivate a different way of being that's less prideful, that's less egocentric, that's less self-centered, right? Our number one, I am this finite body. And number two, I am this finite mind. And the finite mind perceives all of reality in dualistic terms, right? There's a subject in here who's the center of reality. And then there's everything out there, all of the objects of the world. You see the dualism, right? There's a split between the knower and what is known. There's an inherent dualism that's part and parcel of this kind of self-centeredness or pridefulness that comes directly out of a kind of perception that's conditioned by our thinking mind, our finite thinking mind. And when we're operating from that place, when we believe we are the finite body or the finite mind, when things fall apart, we tend to become very fearful and very reactive. Our sense of self becomes threatened. Our sense of being somehow a stable, solid self is threatened. And, you know, when we start to practice, however, and aspire to reach beyond the self, we can begin to see the process of a separate self being constructed out of these mistaken beliefs moment by moment. We can actually observe this process and begin to see that the sense of being a separate self is constructed. It's not inherent to our beingness or to our existence. So that's one of the things we're going to do today. But first, I want to turn to a text from a 20th century Hasidic master who I love so much, Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, known also as the Eish Kodesh, the Holy Fire, a name given to him posthumously. He's also known as the Rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto, because when the ghetto was liquidated, he had the unenviable task of delivering sermons to try and encourage people in the Warsaw Ghetto, and his writings, thank God, survived. So, Kat, if I can ask you to pull up the screen share once more, we'll take a look at this text. And this is one of those texts that, for me personally, as a mindfulness practitioner, when I first read it, if I had been a cartoon, you would have literally seen my jaw drop down to the floor. It's just a breathtaking, beautiful text. And it's a pith instruction on how to transcend our constructed sense of self. And here's what he says. It's a teaching on the line from the Haggadah, which actually originally comes from the Mishnah and Tractate Psachim. In every generation, we must see ourselves as if we left Egypt. With the emphasis on seeing ourselves. The idea being that if you can truly see your essential nature, your true self, beyond constructed identities, then you're already out of Egypt, right? You're already out of the narrows. You're already free. And here's what he says. God said to the first human, "Where are you?" In Hebrew, ayeka. Ayeka. For immediately after this great change, after this horrible fall from Eden to the lowest realms of Sheol, underworld, and subservience to desire, the very essence of the human being was absent and concealed, such that God had to ask, "Where are you?" God wasn't asking Adam, "Where's your physical location?" God didn't need to ask Adam that question. God has a GPS built in, right? God was asking about Adam's humanity. Where has your essential nature gone? Right? Now that you've become so subservient to your desires and you've fallen from your transcendent state, what's happened to your true nature, to the essential you? Now that Piazetzner connects this teaching to our experience, he makes it real for us. When we experience a distressing matter, we are overcome with worry and find it difficult to be joyous then. True story? Just ask yourself, does this resonate with your experience, right? I get a kind of tunnel vision when that happens, when I'm anxious about something. And when we experience a joyous matter, we become totally wrapped up in our happiness and find it difficult to worry then, right? So whatever strong emotion or thought pattern we're feeling right now, we tend to get kind of blended into it, right? And then we kind of develop this kind of tunnel vision. Given that this is so, says the Rabbi, we're in for our worldly thoughts as they pass and return, go and come. Yet our essence, who we truly are, is not to be found. Let's pause there. What he's basically saying is that, though we become totally captivated and our whole sense of identity gets blended into strong emotions and thought patterns when we're feeling them, we become the anger, we become the jealousy, we become the reactivity, or we become the happiness, we become the joy, we become the exaltation. Our sense of self gets completely collapsed into whatever finite experience we're having, right? Even though that's the case, if we look closely, we see all of those experiences are actually finite and they're transient. And not only that, but they're conditioned by external phenomena. And anything that's conditioned will come into being when the conditions are ripe and fall apart when the conditions no longer exist to continue perpetuating that phenomenon. This is common sense, right? We know this. We know this. And therefore, it's a mistake to think that we are our thoughts or our emotions. The belief, I am the thinking mind, or I am this thinker, or I am this feeler, is simply based on inattention and an unconscious belief, right? That collapses our sense of identity into our thoughts and emotions. So here's what he goes on to say. He says, here's the practice we should undertake. We should thus collect our thoughts daily, observing them to see if they're anything other than mental phenomena conditioned by time in the world. And just as temporal and worldly conditions change, so do our thoughts. Nowadays, he's speaking, right? He's speaking to people during a time of persecution and depression. Nowadays, we mostly experience anxious thoughts. And when God assists and time brings about good fortune, happy thoughts will arise. Yet neither these nor the initial ones are who we truly are. They are just temporary residents or guests within us or moving through us. First, they were bad or unwelcome guests, and now they are good, revolving according to the world and the day. But where is the real you? That is, where is your essence, your true self? And he goes on to say, why would we want to answer that question? Right? Because if we are truly present in our inner home, in our self, in our true nature, perforce, neither will joy captivate our minds, nor will worry control us so much. Can stop the screen share, Kat. So the benefit of breaking free of the illusion that we are somehow this separate body mind is that it liberates us, right, from being thrashed about by our thoughts and feelings. So that even if things fall apart, and even if things are wonderful, and delightful, that we remain equanimous, balanced, inherently content, calm, responsive, clear-headed, compassionate. So this is a beautiful teaching, absolutely breathtaking, and so deeply true in my experience. But I don't ever want you to take my word for it. I want you to check it out in the laboratory of your own experience. So let's practice. I want to invite you just to take a couple of moments after you settle into your stance here in a calm, relaxed, and alert body. One firmly planted in the chair or on the cushion, and at the same time rising up toward heaven with an uplifted spine, shoulders relaxed, face muscles relaxed, hands relaxed. Just take a couple of moments to observe the changing phenomena of the body, gathering your attention into the rising and falling of the breath, or sounds, or the feeling of contact between your hands and your lap. Choose whichever locus of attention feels stabilizing and regulating for you. And the eyes can be open or closed, whichever feels more supportive. And just watch the current, watch the change. Recognize the body as a river of sensation, not some solid or fixed entity. And at least for now, when the mind wanders off, send the mind a little smile, letting you know that you see it. And then gently come back to the body. Your sense of existence has never been in doubt, has it? The feeling I am, that doesn't change. But we can see that the belief I am the body adding the adjunct of the body, that's inaccurate. It's false. Because the body is always changing. But when we ask ourselves, who am I? And we see that we are not the body, at least not absolutely the body, we might conclude, oh, I must be the mind. Let's inquire and see if that's true. As if from a watchtower, see if you can begin to bear witness to your thoughts. We're leaving the physical sensations behind for now. They can be there in the background, but you don't need to focus on them directly. And instead, adopt a witnessing stance and simply observe your thoughts as they arise, move through the mind, and subside. And by thoughts, I don't only mean the inner chatter. I also mean images, intentions, beliefs, memories, emotions. Ideas. Watch the content of the mind and inquire, who am I? Am I this thinking mind? The sense that I am, that I exist, that doesn't change, does it? You don't doubt that reality. But is that the same as the thinking mind? Or is the thinking mind moving, changing, like a river, always in flux? At some point, your sense of identity, your whole being, in fact, may become blended into a series of thoughts. When you snap out of it, just notice that that happened. And come back into a witnessing stance so that you're sitting by the side of the stream, watching the stream go by instead of actually being in the water. You might also notice how your thoughts are conditioned. They're often arising in response to external stimuli, sounds, feelings, sensations, events, a show you watched yesterday or a headline you saw in the news today. Or they might be arising in response to sensations or emotions or other thoughts. They don't exist of their own accord. They're not self-sustaining. They depend on causes and conditions. Is that not so? These are not questions to think about. These are just questions that we hold in the heart and mind as we observe the flow of thought. And notice intuitively the nature of thought. You might also notice how thoughts are self-referential. How many of your thoughts begin with a sense of I am this, or I am that, or I need to do this, I need to do that, or I need to get this or get that, or avoid this or avoid that? The sense of being a separate self is thereby reinforced by a thinking mind that's constantly referring back to itself as I. Over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Sam. Um, Definitely want to invite everybody to stick around if you can for a few minutes to reflect on and debrief and process together and share your questions. Before we do that, we'll just give a chance for those who may need to sign off now. Anybody else who is saying Kaddish today, to remember any loved ones, and if you want to share the name or names of anyone you're holding in mind or heart as we say Kaddish today in the chat, please feel welcome to do so. If you need to leave us right now, Tzeitchem l'shalom, farewell, and look forward to having you back tomorrow or whenever you can join us. In the meantime, we'll put up the text of Kaddish. And again, in the chat, if you want to share any names of anybody please feel welcome to do that, and also feel welcome to unmute, and you can join me in reciting Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Rabbi
Amen.
Alma V'ra Perute V'yifnich V'chayechon Yomechon V'chayei B'chol Beit Yisrael Ba'agalav Zman Karev Amen.
Oh, amen.
Shmei Rabbi
Hey,
Barak
Shalom,
Olam
Barak,
Almei
Olam, Almaya, Almaya.
Yitbarach Yishtabach Yitzhar V'Yitmam V'Yaseh V'Yitchanar V'Yit'ale V'Yithalal B'Shem V'Kedusha V'Yichud La Min Kol Birchata V'Shirata V'Chazda V'Nechemata V'Niran De'alma V'Yimru Yehi Shmama Rabba Min Shemaya Chaim Aleinu Yisrael Amru Amen. Shalom b'mamav, Shuya Aseh Shalom Leinu v'al Kol Yisrael v'al Kol Yeshvei Tevel v'imru Amen.
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 Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. So we have a chance now to ask any questions of Sam or of each other, and share anything in this practice that came up for you, and definitely curious to hear both to hear in the chat, what did you notice arising? How was that for you? Really? Sam's always great about, don't take my word for it, check it out in your own experience. So now's a chance to share, if you'd like, a little bit about your own experience. And Sam, we may have learned that piece of the Yosher together at one point, and we might have even learned the Derech HaMelech. Sam and I have had a chavruta on the Derech HaMelech over the years as well, and have studied that together. And I think this question of impermanence, that can go so many ways, right? I think it's like, on the one hand, it can be very liberating, and on the other hand, it can be really terrifying, and it can be helpful, and it can do a lot of things for us. So, I'm curious to hear how people's experience was today. A lot of good feedback already. There's a question here, Sam, from Cornelia. If we work with the idea that everything is temporary, that everything falls apart, how do we square that with the idea that our place of inner refuge or peace does not also fall away or apart, or is a place we can always turn to? Yeah.
Such a good question. What I want to stress in the question is the word everything. Everything. Everything that is conditioned, everything that is an object that exists within space and time will invariably fall apart. So on that level, we can say there actually is no thing that isn't impermanent. And without giving away what our true nature is, because I'd much rather that you come to discover it for yourself, because otherwise it will just remain a concept or an idea rather than a realized experience. And ideas and concepts won't liberate us from the narrow perspective of the small self. They'll only reify the activity of the small self, and the belief that we know something special that other people may not know. And in that regard, make us even more prideful. What I'll just say, though, is that whatever we're looking for as our essence is not a thing. Right? In that regard, we can say it's nothing in the sense of no thing. It's not an object. Not an object that's limited or conditioned in any way by time or space. So that's all I'm going to say about that for now. And tomorrow we're going to begin to turn our attention toward our true nature. Yesterday and today we've been working on identifying clearly and knowing clearly who we're not, right? And liberating ourselves from the mistaken belief that we are somehow the finite body and the finite mind. I'm not saying that the finite body and the finite mind don't exist. They do. What I'm saying is that there's an unconscious error that we continue to make and reinforce in our perception, right? And that is the perception, I am the finite body, I am the finite mind. And what I'm suggesting now is that what we're going to be calling our inner refuge, an inner place that isn't subject to the ravages of time, right, or the limitations of space, that is a place of infinitude. Infinitude. And what is infinite by its very nature cannot arise and pass away, because arising connotes a beginning and a delimitation in time and space. Passing away does the same thing. It delineates boundary, limitation, cessation of something that was. So we're looking for a part of ourselves, and this harkens back to the Unatana Tokef prayer that we shared yesterday, right? That has no beginning and no end, that is timeless, which is exactly how we describe the divine in Unatana Tokef, right? We say, we are like, a hovering cloud that just dissipates. We are like floating dust, right? Or a withering flower. But you, divine one, you are chai v'kayam, right? You are everlasting. Ein kitz bali shnotecha, vein kitz la'orech yamecha. There's no end to your years. And there is no conclusion to the length of your days. Just to say the divine is timeless. Timeless, no beginning, no end. What if we're not talking about God out there, but the divine in here? That's the invitation and the proposition that we're putting before you here today.
There's so many questions are coming up, Sam. There's a couple related to sort of mental health and I think development, and some kind of combining two, but like this one's from Nancy. I wonder about the developmental journey of getting to this learning. Don't young humans need to establish a sense of concrete identity before they can let it go?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. It was the I believe the Kutzker Rabbi who said you have to be a something before you can realize that you're a nothing. Yeah, absolutely. I would never teach these kinds of practices to adolescents, for example, or young children. Having been a teacher of high school kids for over a decade at some point in my life, I didn't teach them these kinds of practices. You have to have a healthy sense of self before you can begin to pull the healthy sense of self apart and recognize that it's provisional. Right? I'm not saying here that we completely get rid of our sense of being a separate self. We don't get rid of it. We just see through the illusion that's who we truly are, right? Or the fullness of who we are. And we recognize that the separate sense of selfhood is provisional, and it's conventional. We need it. We need it to operate in this world, right? To be able to make plans, to be able to drive down the street and not smash into another car, to be able to conduct spiritual practice, right? I mean, who's going to conduct spiritual practice unless there's a person here who says, oh, I want to, develop and evolve in some way. I'm going to sit down on a cushion or in a chair and be still and watch my breath or watch my thoughts, So our separate sense of selfhood is very important. The key is not to be fooled into thinking that that's the fullness of who we are, or the whole story, because then we're trapped. Then we're trapped in the finite body mind and all of its fear and reactivity.
And I think some of that, Sam, I find to be, again, it's like in my own experience, and maybe this is as I get older, right, and have more of an appreciation of it, but that in a certain sense, it's like it becomes a little more intuitive. That I mean, obviously, I'm separate from you, right? Like right now, okay, and the more the more I tune into it, the more I'm also aware of the ways that that doesn't come close to articulating the fullness of the reality that's also here, right? And so it's sort of deepening and being able to hold that. And I think part of the developmental challenge is being able to hold paradox, right? Is something we grow into. I'm thinking of my son Toby, who's 10, who Sam knows. I think just last night as he was going to bed, he said, like, we're not actually standing on the ground. There's like at least an atom that's like between my foot and the ground. Like, I mean, he has like some whoosh, he has some sense of this already, of this, like, on a scientific level, and probably also on a spiritual level. But I totally agree that like that if we introduce our tradition teaches a lot of the stuff you don't start to learn until you're 40, right? Until you have a really well-developed sort of secure sense of self, and there's a good reason for that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I also just want to say real quickly, that I don't see these two realities as a paradox at all. They're actually just two different perspectives or two sides of the same coin. So I'll just offer a quick metaphor to illustrate, in case it's helpful. There's this beautiful story that I believe was originally told by Ram Dass, of blessed memory, and was I encountered it from Jeff Roth. I heard it from Jeff Roth. I think it's in his book, Jewish Mindfulness Meditation Practices for Everyday Life, quoted in the name of Ram Dass, right? So there's these two waves coming into shore, and they both look kind of toward the shore and see their sister and brother waves crashing. And one of the waves becomes very, very agitated and worried and anxious. He thinks, "Oh my God, I'm going to die." There goes Mavis and Rachel and John and Shmuel, right? And looking for someone to commiserate with him. That wave turns to his sister wave, who also sees the waves crashing against the shore, and the sister wave is calm and unperturbed. And the anxious wave looks again, toward the shore and sees more waves crashing, gets even more anxious, more worried. He's just absolutely a nervous wreck. Takes a couple of Xanax. It doesn't even work. Turns to his sister wave, and he says, "What's up with you? Why are you so calm? You and I are looking at the same thing." And the calm wave says, "It's because I know something you don't. You're not a wave, you're water." Okay. So the absolute view is the view of the ocean, right? Where even as individual waves arise, crest, eventually dissolve completely, right? They're always water. They're never separate from the water. That's the absolute view that we are able to see from our essential nature, once we recognize and then abide in our essential nature. But the relative view is that there is a wave, and it has its own unique contours, its own unique duration, its own unique shape, its own unique, we might say, personality and way of manifesting in the world, right? But at the same time, the wave is never separate from the water. It's not a paradox, right? It just depends which perspective you're adopting. Are you adopting the perspective of the wave, or are you adopting the perspective of the water?
it's interesting to think about it in the context of light, that is a particle and a wave. I wonder how we would handle, adapting it to the light metaphor. Yeah. Interesting. Wonderful. All right. I think that may be a good place for us to hold it. There's Sam, a lot of love for you here. People are really appreciating it and feeling it. So the good news is you got 2 more days. So two more days of this with Sam. And also this is like all of our meditations are available on YouTube as well. And so like when it comes time for high holiday season, we'll be doing plenty, don't worry, during Elul and preparation and all of that. But this is maybe something you want to come back to at this time, at that season as well in a couple months. So yeah, all right. Thank you, everybody. Great. All right.
Thanks. Sending you all love too. Take good care.
Wonderful. We'll see you back tomorrow.